All right. Hi, Founder fans. Jason here. Thank you for coming to Study Hall. Ask Me Anything, where we're going to talk about the American founders. We're going to answer any questions you have, so feel free to start leaving them down below. I do want to note right off the bat, first of all, I did just get a message from Matt. I have been saying noon on Sunday, and it's 12:15. I am in the habit of putting my videos up generally at 8:15 Eastern Standard Time every night, and well, I'm just in the custom of going at quarter after. But in my mind, I'm doing it at 8 o'clock every night. But then I come up at 8 o'clock to do my work. And here we are. And then it starts 15 minutes later. And now here we are at 12:15. So I do apologize for that confusion. I assure you, next week I will go up at noon. I told you guys noon. And I told my family noon. And I walked up here to go do it at noon. But that includes setting it up and doing the thumbnail and yada yada. So I do apologize for that. You guys, as always, this is the Study Hall. This is your time to ask me whatever questions your heart's desire. No questions yet. That's okay. I am also going to note, I did put a fresh new link to the Discord channel in the description below. We've already got like more than 10 people in there, growing really quick. And a lot of fun discussions. You may have seen I added a little meme section so you could put your American Revolution memes in there. I also did put a rules page, which I probably should have done from the beginning. Hi, Matt. Thank you for coming. I apologize for the confusion before. And yeah, so any questions you want to discuss, any topics that may have come up. I know we were talking about on the Discord Washington's crossing the Delaware and how oftentimes people are... I think it was Misfit was saying she was a little confused about people think it's on New Year's Eve. No, New Year's Eve. I can't get it out today. Christmas Eve, when actually it was on Christmas itself, at least that night. And Germans traditionally had celebrated 2 days of Christmas. So the 26th was still kind of Christmas. No, it was not you. Matt, I don't know if you popped in late, but yeah, I was explaining right when I started how... I come up to do my work every night at 8 o'clock, but technically I go live at 8:15, and that was my confusion today. I came up at noon, like usual, to do this video, but then it takes a few minutes to get everything set up. So next week I will be here at 11:45 to shoot at noon, like promised. I apologize. Again, you guys have any questions, feel free. I hope you guys had a very happy holiday. I'm going to give a shout out. Now, this video is not sponsored, but we did miss our trivia this week again because the holidays. So I got to give a shout out to Liberty & Co. because my wife knows that I like Liberty & Co. products. So I got some for like the third straight Christmas Liberty & Co. stuff. And I won't put out I didn't put it up yet, but I did take a picture I'll put up on my Twitter and Facebook pages about just how awesome his packaging is. Tyson includes like these personalized thank you cards. Like, I love it. And then I got this, and you guys can help me with this. I'm still waiting for you guys to ask me some questions. So I finally got the Liberty & Co. Live Free or Die, which is, how do I hold it straight? There we go. New Hampshire's motto, which comes from General John Stark. I don't know where to put it. I think I'm going to put it up here because I don't like how the light looks here. It's too bright. You know what I mean? So hopefully I can use this to dampen it up. Although the picture my mom made that I just put up is the most short-lived part of my set of all time. Again, you guys aren't asking any questions, so I will go through. You know what we could do until I get a question. Again, this is Study Hall for you guys. I'm going to go to the archives page on my website. You want to come with me? Here, come with me. I'm pulling up. I mean, we can scroll out. This is just to put a perspective on how many articles I've written in the last few years. And we can go to any month. If you want to shout out a month or a day. No, I don't want to subscribe to my own email address. Let's go to January 2019. Let's see what I was writing about in January 2019. Israel Putnam, Asia Barnes Tavern. This is a fun one. Asia Barnes is super random. He owned a tavern in Connecticut. And I'll pull myself back up. And first of all, there are many people named Asia Barnes, A-S-A. I believe it's pronounced Asia. It might be Asa. Let me know what you think. And he had a tavern in Connecticut. And it was not really important except in the summer of 1781 when there was a special visitor The entire French army, at least the entire French army that had come to the United States, well, they just happened to stop off at Asia Barnes Tavern and ended up using it for a brief time as their headquarters. For 4 nights. 4 nights, the soldiers slept across the street. General Rochambeau actually slept in Asia Barnes Tavern. And then they went south, and that is the entirety of Asia Barnes' story, the American Revolution. It was funny how we were confused when Washington crossed the Delaware. Yes. Oh, yeah. You popped in a second late. I did bring that up real quick. Like I said, guys, jump in the Discord if you're not in there. It's a lot of fun. We're building a really cool community in there. Asia Barnes. Yeah. We were a little confused on there because the tradition has it that it was the night Christmas Eve, and they attacked on Christmas. When at the battles of man, I can't get anything out. When Washington crossed the Delaware to attack the Germans in New Jersey. The thing is, traditionally, Germans have celebrated 2 days of Christmas. You know, there's Christmas Eve, and then there's Christmas, and then there's a second day. It's not another Christmas. It's just more celebration, so to speak. I understand in many German households, at least from my family's custom, is that you'd actually put the Christmas tree up on Christmas, and then you'd have it at least for a second day. So when the Americans crossed the Delaware and attacked the Germans, it's confused with Christmas Eve because the Germans were still kind of celebrating Christmas, even though they were soldiers. So, like, you know, soldiers at war don't really celebrate like we consider celebrating, but they were a bit distracted with that. And because of this, it kind of gets lost in the lore of the American Revolution, and it's often thought that, you know, we crossed the Delaware Christmas Eve and attacked on Christmas. Although, truthfully, it's just as special from my perspective that they crossed the Delaware on Christmas and attacked the next day. So the Americans were at it. We had a war to win. Again, I'm nervous starting these videos because I don't have a ton to talk about because I'm leaving this open for you guys to study. If you don't have any questions, we won't make it too long. We could try and do. I mean, we could do the trivia game if you prefer that. Let's see. And what was I doing? I was bouncing through January 2019. And I'm going to pull this back up. This is essentially how I pick my articles on the weekends and how I pick a lot of the videos I make. I'll like go to my archive page and then I'll just scroll randomly and then be like, oh, how John Paul got his Jones, or Willie Jones leads North Carolina. And I'll select that, I'll reread it, and I'll make a video. I mean, if you want to talk to him, Willie Jones was a gentleman, I'll pull myself back up. Willie Jones was a gentleman in South Carolina, I believe it was. North Carolina, I apologize. Born into a very... And his first name is not Willie, it's pronounced Wiley. I'm just seeing, I always forget with this guy. The Jones family of North Carolina was super wealthy, and there was a gentleman named John Paul who was being accused of misbehaving as captain of a ship for flogging his men and abusing his men on the ship for lack of discipline, but England felt that behavior was unacceptable. So this gentleman, John Paul, fled to the New World, and he was taken in by Wiley Jones, who was very nice to him. So John Paul took on a pseudonym, or a new surname, and his last name was, and he took on the last name Jones in honor of Wiley Jones, and then his name became John Paul Jones, and he would later go on to be considered the father of the American Navy. Matt Coyote. I'm not sure. Talking about the Arizona Coyotes? I'm not. Yeah, I'm a little lost with that. I apologize. Wiley Jones would actually be a leading anti-federalist. Wiley Jones was elected to attend the Constitutional Convention, which he did not, because he did not think there should be a constitution. And then he would fight against it. Oh, Wiley Coyote. Oh, well played. Fair enough. But yes, I don't know how you spell Wiley Coyote. I mean, we can look it up, but yeah. I'm gonna take a sip of water. Again, I'm just popping on for you guys in this video. Yeah. You know, I knew what I was gonna do. Maybe I'll do this next week. I was gonna fill a hat with names on pieces of paper and just kind of draw them out and talk about them. We could do that. I will note, Matt, I do plan on making a video for tomorrow on not Francis Dana, Rufus King. Matt's been asking for Rufus King. Rufus King has been asking for Rufus King. He very much deserves my time. It will probably end up being a little bit longer than most of the videos I try and put out on as my daily videos, but very deservedly so. Rufus King is an extraordinarily underrated American founder. He was there throughout, as they say, and would, spoiler alert for tomorrow's video, would be the last Federalist candidate for president. An unofficial candidate, but still the last. I believe the title of the article I wrote about him, and this is years ago, but I believe I called him the last Federalist. Which is arguably not true. I mean, because John Quincy Adams would be president after that. And theoretically, he was a Federalist favorite, though by that point the Federalist Party had certainly all but died out. Let's see. Get through. Alright, well, there's not a ton of questions. I will be happy to hang out. If someone's coming in, well, ask away. If you just popped in, ask a question, because we are running low on questions, and the point of this is to have a discussion. So let me know if there was anything you're studying, anything you want to know, any founders you're curious about, a name you've heard, would like to know more about. I've written about hundreds of them, so I could probably help. While we do that, let's see. Gonna make a video on what was I saying? Rufus King for tomorrow. If there's anyone else you'd like to learn about this week, let me know. I'm also gonna spend this week. My spouse is off for the week, so I am really going to finally make sure I can do my interviews appropriately, and hopefully for January relaunch these interviews, because I'm excited. I've been talking to several people of fairly impressive stature, and I will. Ashley just came in. Have I covered Supreme Court cases? I have. Some. Anything in particular about the Supreme Court you'd like to know? Any particular case or issue that they covered? I will say, it's interesting. John Jay famously was the first Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, and then he resigns when he's elected governor of New York. Also, while he's Chief Justice, he goes on a special assignment to discuss with England a treaty, and it ends up being the Jay Treaty. And it's fascinating because during this time there's little attention being paid to the Supreme Court, and it's because the Supreme Court didn't do a whole lot. They heard a handful of cases, mostly were settled on technicality issues, and really not a whole lot got done, because at this point the Supreme Court was kind of looked at, yes, as a third branch, but it was like the little brother branch. You had the executive branch and the legislative branch, and they were really holding each other at odds. And then you have the Supreme Court, which kind of hangs out in the background, because, I mean, for example, the United States Congress makes up the Judiciary Act of 1789, and then an addendum Judiciary Act in 1791, and they literally create the federal the federal judicial system, other than the Supreme Court itself. And then the president appoints all the judges. So there's the judicial system. Wow, easy for me to say. The judicial system was essentially a backup system. Not a backup system, but a lesser part of the government, until fourth Chief Justice John Marshall in the Marbury v. Madison, case of Marbury v. Madison, where John Marshall and the Supreme Court gave itself the power of judicial review, which means gives them the power to review the constitutionality of laws. So for the first, 15 years of the United States, there was no. Hi, Tyler. Well, welcome. First time here. I can go over central banking. Absolutely, guys. Thank you for coming. Just so you know, this particular video is, and Ask Me Anything. If you're new here, which is one of my favorite things to say, I talk about the American Revolution, put out videos about American founders 3 days a week. We do a live wrap-up of I write articles 5 days a week about the American Revolution. We do a wrap-up of that on Wednesdays. Fridays, we play trivia. So this is Ask Me Whatever You Want to Talk About, and I will talk about it. as opposed to the more structured things of other places. I'm going to wrap up. I will get to your questions now that people are asking. It was a little slow start. To wrap up the Supreme Court, though, like I said, it was kind of they looked at it as the third branch. There weren't three equal branches. The judicial system, when the Constitution was written, was the third branch. It wasn't really till John Marshall gave the power of judicial review to the Supreme Court that it ended up being supreme, in fact. And now when we look at the Supreme Court, that's mostly what we look at it for. Can I turn up the mic? Oof, no, I can talk a little bit louder. No, I know, people... I don't want to blow it out. Hopefully that's a little better. I'll try and speak up. I know I need to get up. You found me from a cool streamer like... Oh, okay, great. So as far as central banking in the early days, so each state had its own... Depends how early the days. So if you go back to the John Robinson scandal in the 1760s, before the American Revolution broke out, there was the 7 Years' War, which we call the French and Indian War in the United States. And during the French and Indian War, war tends to be good for the economy. So things were pretty good. But during this time, the state of Virginia was issuing paper money. And this person, John Robinson, was a member, I believe the Speaker of Virginia's House of Burgesses, and he was simultaneously the colony's treasurer. So the colony had printed money to go out into circulation, and it was the responsibility of this John Robinson fella to take the money after a while, after things were stimulated, take it back out of circulation and destroy it. But instead, he took it out of circulation and started loaning it to all the other wealthy people in Virginia, because they took out loans so they could make purchases from England and then sell it over here, yada, yada, yada. Well, this gentleman passes away. And when he passes away, Edmund Pendleton, who was one of his proteges, and Edmund Pendleton would go on to be one of the most important people in the early days of the Revolution. Pendleton goes in and realizes, oh no, he hasn't been destroying this money, he's been loaning it out. So he's been loaning fake money. And suddenly, whammy, Virginia's colonial economy collapses. And this is just after the French and Indian Wars coming to a close. So again, the war was stimulating the economy in its own way. That's gone. And Great Britain, there are a lot of acts passed, and we talk about the Stamp Act and the Tea Act and that nature, the Navigation Acts, but we kind of forget to look at the Currency Act. And the Currency Act, unfortunately, was... someone's going down for a nap. Whoopsie daisy. The Currency Act, unfortunately, destroyed... I'm sorry, I got distracted. Of course, the one time I forget to turn off the baby monitor right in the corner. Forgive me for a second. Okay, for those of you who are new here, that's never happened before, but I apologize. So anyway, Virginia's in this terrible situation already when it comes to finances, and I didn't even turn it off. I'm an idiot. And then the Currency Act gets passed, and the Currency Act is interesting because it's basically saying you can't print your own money. You have to use British government approved money. And this was challenging for several reasons, especially in Virginia where the economy had collapsed, and it was also challenging elsewhere, of course. But they wanted to be able to smash that like button. Thank you, Tyler. Welcome aboard. Welcome to the team. Check it out. Oh, by the way, guys, if you like the American Revolution, there's a link to our Discord channel on the bottom. We just started it last week, and we have a really cool community already. So the John Robinson is a good symbol of how banking was working at the time. And many colonies wanted to print their own money, but the British government generally wanted them to keep it in specie. And specie was gold or silver. Furthermore, everything in the world at the time was compared to the Spanish dollar. The Spanish dollar was essentially then what the U.S. dollar is today to the world, or at least the Western world. It was the reliable money. During this time, banks come and go. They're all privately owned. There is, of course, banks in England that essentially run most of it. But as the American Revolution breaks out, well, we need to pay for this war, and kind of haphazardly, the American banking system begins, mostly under the guidance of Robert Morris, who is famous as the financier of the American Revolution. He was one of those wealthy people who invested their money into the war, kept the Continental afloat. You also have, we were talking recently on this channel about Blair McLennan, whose name I just can't get out right, another super wealthy guy who invested. And then as the war ends, you see all these wealthy people taking advantage of opportunities. You see them buying a lot of land. You see them investing. We were talking last week about the Empress of China. So they invested in a ship that went to China to trade directly with China. You see them building all sorts of different things, trying to make some money. And this includes starting banks. And there's the Bank of the United States is a private bank started in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. Shortly thereafter, you have the Bank of New York, which is still around as BNY Mellon, comes around. And they are, thank you, Ashley, Blair McClinackin. Thank you. Again, some of these names. So the Bank of New York also starts. And it's interesting, we were talking recently, too, about the Bank of New York. The Bank of New York was, you have Alexander Hamilton is working as a representative for his brother-in-law and some other people in the in New York against George Clinton, who was a longtime governor of New York. They're both starting banks at the same time, and Alexander Hamilton comes in as a middleman to help start that bank and consolidate it into one bank. And then Hamilton goes and, pushes for the Constitution to get written and ratified. And the Constitution was actually meant to stimulate the economy and to help things like banks get created. And that's why when you look at his assumption plan, it's very complicated. There is a book I've been reading and talking about a lot over the last few months, Jefferson's Treasurer. It talks about Albert Gallatin, who would have been the treasurer, who was the treasurer of the secretary for Thomas Jefferson. And a lot of it talks about his time in the United States House of Representatives during the time that Alexander Hamilton is putting through his assumption plan. And I'm not an economist, and it's extremely complicated how banking works. But this book actually does a really good job of him responding to it in that nature. And so, yeah, and then again, it's while Hamilton is treasurer, they start the stock exchange in New York. And these three banks, two of which Hamilton is a major investor of, are on the stock exchange. There's three banks, that's it. And Hamilton has two of them. And then they start making money, and he conveniently leaves the Treasury Department to go, make money. So that's a super brief overview of banking, and banking is extraordinarily complicated. I will be happy to talk more about it later. Thank you, Tyler. Smash that like button. You're the man. I know JFK gave the Federal Reserve the ability to print $1 and $2 bills. That was no good. Ended the money when he did that, making silver. Yeah, no, this is fun. Tyler, not going to talk about JFK. Stick to the revolution here. Thank you for bringing it up. We avoid modern politics here at all costs because American history is for everyone. But if you are interested in the gold standard and that kind of thing, and Mr. Chad's a lot, you too. If you're interested in the gold standard, Roger Sherman is, as my usual viewers know, one of the most important American founders. He signed all of the major documents at the beginning of the Revolution. He wrote a book in 1752, 20-something years before the Revolution broke out. And it's called, you can look it up under A Caveat Against Injustice. The full title is A Caveat Against Injustice, An Inquiry into the Evils of a Fluctuating Medium of Exchange. It's a short book. It's like 20 pages. It is in old-timey language, but he is talking about fiat currency, a.k.a. The difference between a gold standard and money that's just kind of printed haphazardly. And anyone in modern America who talks at all about, and your conversation about JFK reflects this, who talks at all about the gold standard and inflation and things like that, the idea that Americans should keep their money on the gold standard goes back to Roger Sherman in 1752, before the war even started. So I highly recommend you look into that, gentlemen, and give that book a read. It's amazing. Maybe I'll do a video about that in particular. Let's see. I saw some other things coming through. I'm not sure. We just read a lot of history. That's all. Cool tweet you had about Gouverneur Morris and his self-inflicted surgery. Definitely read it. All right, well, that's kind of gross. Matt, Mr. Chadslot, yeah, definitely read it. Matt is referencing, I retweeted something, I think it was from the Journal of the American Revolution. You have a video about Roger Sherman. Oh, well, that Roger Sherman video is like one of my first from I've been doing this about a year and a half. My early videos are not good. Actually, I sent it out in my email. I should probably post it, but if you guys look up my Christmas video from last year, I used to talk really quiet. Like, you think I'm quiet now. That's my microphone. I've learned to be very animated to keep your attention. I used to be very reserved and, historian-ish. But, that would tell you pretty much the basic outline of Roger Sherman's life, Tyler. So, give it a watch. Again, you have to deal with me being very, very quiet, and the set does not look good, and I'm on my phone. Things have changed in the last year and a half. Thanks to the Patriots who support me on Patreon, actually, who have helped me offset a lot of the costs of updating the channel. So if you want to help out, check that out. I'm sure there's a link below. I don't remember. There was a question. Matt's referencing. So Gouverneur Morris is an amazing person to read about. One of the books that got me into the American Revolution, if you forgive me for a second, I know it's behind me somewhere. There's a book behind me somewhere called Gentleman Revolutionary, The Rake Who Wrote the Constitution. Gouverneur Morris is amazing. He is a wealthy guy from New York who really likes to... he has a word for it that escapes me. But he likes to spend time with the ladies. A little bit more than society at the time found appropriate. In fact, a little bit more than most people in society today would find appropriate, especially because many of those ladies would be married. But he was indifferent to that. He would go on. He was in his mid-20s when he helped John Jay write the New York Constitution. He would then go to Philadelphia and represent New York in the Continental Congress, where he signed the Articles of Confederation as a representative of New York. Then he would end up working with Robert Morris in creating the banks. He would be essentially the number 2 in funding the revolution, with number 3 being Chaim Solomon, one of the Jewish founding fathers. Those 3 men, more than anyone, would pay for the American Revolution. Morris would then go to the Constitutional Convention as a representative of Philadelphia. At that point, he had moved permanently, and he not only signs the United States Constitution, but Gouverneur Morris actually wrote the Constitution. And I mean, it's in his hand. So when you see a copy of the Constitution, that is the penmanship of Gouverneur Morris, and he would write. He's the one who wrote "We the People of the United States." So when you hear "We the People," that is from Gouverneur Morris. I think it's Gouverneur. I hear it pronounced Governor. It's spelled strange. Again, I know the book's around here. Oh, it's literally right next to me. For those of you who are new here, I went through a period in my life where I would removed all the dust jackets like an idiot from my books. I thought they were in the way. Gentleman Revolutionary. It's by Richard Brookhiser, who is my personal favorite. This book, it has a cartoony picture of him on the front, usually. I highly recommend it. Absolutely love it. Excuse me. What was I saying? Okay, so anyway, New York Constitution. So Gouverneur Morris in the 1777 wrote the New York Constitution, and a decade later in 1787, then also wrote the United States Constitution. With the New York Constitution, he had more of a hand in actually writing it, while the United States Constitution, when I say wrote, he drafted it. It was, everyone wrote it together, that one. As opposed to New York, which was a room full of people, the Constitution was really authored by many people, some of whom didn't even actually sign it. So, if you go back a few years, in between those two constitutions, he was in Philadelphia getting on a carriage and he slipped and fell and it turned and his leg got crushed by the carriage, and the physician in attendance decided to amputate his leg. I believe it was his right leg. Don't quote me on that. I don't remember which leg, but he lost one of his legs, and it turns out there were other doctors who said he probably didn't have to amputate it. But either way, they cut off his leg, and he had one leg for the rest of his life. He had a peg leg. He was, I think, the only peg leg American founder. And John Jay, his old friend, because of his time with the ladies, actually famously said, I'm going to paraphrase, I don't want to say quote, because I'm probably getting it a little bit wrong, but I wish they had removed something else. Because everyone knew he was being so loose. So years go by. Gouverneur Morris goes to France, replaces Thomas Jefferson as a representative to France. Now, the French Revolution had already broken out. He gets there just after the French Revolution breaks out. He, unlike Thomas Jefferson and his later replacement, James Monroe, did not like what France was doing at all. So it didn't really help with the whole, do we support France in their revolution or not thing. Gouverneur Morris's involvement with that is one of the reasons George Washington didn't. George Washington did trust him. He trusted everyone, but very much trusted him. Anyway, so, what Matt was bringing up is years later, as he aged, he does finally settle down and marry someone, and he has a blockage in his urethra, and he decides to clear it by sharpening a whalebone. Hi, Misfit. And the whalebone was probably made out of his wife's brassiere or corset. And he takes the whalebone and inserts it into the tip of his private parts to clear the blockage. And he gets infected, and that's how he died. So anyway, gross. Gouverneur Morris is probably the most fascinating American founder, because I've glossed over a lot of his stories. Poor Gouverneur Morris. Yeah, I know. John Adams, my email doesn't work, so I can't type in the Discord chat. Oh, John Adams, I'm sorry about that. I had just kind of thrown up the Discord channel. Like I said, I went through and updated a lot of stuff and made rules. That is a security measure, so that people can't just come in and troll us and ruin our good time. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to leave that rule on. I've actually, when I was looking at the security rules, it's on the lowest setting, and the lowest setting is set up an email. So I don't know if you can get assistance with that and get access to an email that would permit it. I do apologize for those changes, but like I said, I just started the Discord channel, and I do want to make it secure for everyone on there, myself included, because there are bad people out there, and it's lame, but it happens. I know people with very messed up legs from car. Well, yeah. Well, to be fair, Tyler, we have a lot better medicine nowadays than cut it off. They're all mad at their wives. They were all mad their wives wanted to sleep with him, or they did. Yeah. Well. So okay. So the legend had it for a very long time that Gouverneur Morris lost his leg because a husband caught him in bed with his wife, and he jumped out the window and was hit by a carriage when he was running away. That's not true, despite the fact that it makes a lot of sense. All right, let's see. That was his second self-surgery. That's right, Matt. Good point. He had already inserted something in there once before in his life. And it worked the first time. To give him credit, it seems to have alleviated his pain the first time. What's wrong with the guy who wrote the Constitution? Well, Tyler, there were a lot of people who did not love the United States Constitution. Like I said, I do believe you're new here. Make sure you subscribe. Because every Wednesday, so I write articles 5 days a week. And then I publish them on my website, Founder of the Day. and I put 2 old ones out over the weekend. And on Wednesday at 8:15 Eastern Standard Time, we have a discussion. That one's more of a lecture. This is a discussion. We're having fun here. That is more of a lecture where I will just go through the last 7 founders I wrote about. And I bring this up because every Friday, for a year and a half, I published a review of a different Federalist paper. But now I've moved on to anti-Federalist papers. Right now we're discussing Brutus. So we're actually, every week, pretty heavily criticizing the United States Constitution, as other founders did at the time. In fact, Brutus, who we're reading now, we don't know certain who it was. It was most likely Robert Yates, who actually went to the Constitutional Convention and then left because he didn't like what was happening and actively was against them. Cool. Thanks, Tyler. We're happy to have you. Great. Yeah. Was there anything I missed, or is there anything else? Hi, I'm from Infernal Machines. Thanks for coming. I watched the old one. I put up like 12 hours of screen time a day. It's bad. Okay. Yeah, no. I know, me too. It's the world we live in now. So I was actually thinking about doing separate videos for each one. At this point, they're just in there. It's usually the second thing I talk about in the hour-long videos for Wednesdays. But I was thinking about doing like separate ones. Let me know if you guys would like that. Or I can go back and like do one for each Federalist paper. Although that's been done online. There's not a whole lot of anti-Federalist stuff out there. Because, offering the traditional criticisms of the United States Constitution isn't necessarily in vogue anymore. But it's important that, I feel that it is very important that we do read the criticisms. Because, the Constitution, we like to look back and be like, yeah, they wrote the Constitution and everyone loved it. And it's like, no, it was like a 55-45 issue. And many of the biggest states, their conventions that were called together had a few hundred people in the room, and they were decided by a handful of votes. The Constitution was not anywhere near a unanimous type of document. And it's really interesting to learn about their things. Oh, Matt, so I updated Discord. I put in certain security measures, and you have to put in your email address now to verify that you're a real person and not a robot. And it sounds like that might be giving him a little bit of trouble. I mean, I know he's a real person, but Mr. Chancelot, what were the main criticisms of the Constitution? What were the main criticisms of the Constitution? First and foremost was that it would lead to tyranny. Was that it was not a... So the Federalists called themselves Federalists, and then the Anti-Federalists were slandered with the term Anti-Federalists, when the truth is the Anti-Federalists actually wanted a confederation, like the Articles of Confederation. They all agreed that there were problems with the Articles of Confederation. It was written in haste, and it was put together quickly, and there needed to be updates. That's why every state except Rhode Island sent representatives to update the Articles of Confederation. But they wanted state power, and now at the time they often reference a political philosopher named Montesquieu, who was popular a handful of decades before the founders were doing their founding. And the argument was, the general idea at the time is that to have a representative republic, what they would call a free government, you couldn't have too many people, because the government needed to reflect the people themselves. Actually, we just talked about Brutus 3 this week, and Brutus 3 says you should be able to look at the representatives of the government and have an idea of what the people themselves look like. And it doesn't mean actually what they look like the makeup of, if there's more farmers than anyone else, then there should be mostly farmers in the government. If there's 10% of the people are merchants, then 10% of the government should be merchants. And the only way you could really do that is to have a very small government. And many of them were very concerned that the Federalists were saying it's a federation, and the Anti-Federalists were saying, no, this is a national government. And when you get to this great size, it's almost impossible for the people to have representation. And though they were concerned at the time, they were concerned it would grow from there. Because at the time, including slaves, there were about 2.5 million people in the colonies. So that was already a lot for them, and there was already a lot of diversity in the culture, just between, when the people from New Hampshire went to the First Continental Congress and spoke to the people from South Carolina, they had trouble talking to each other because their accents were so different. Their English was so different. And the problem was that as the nation grew, it would just be too many people. And another example, and I do see Matt saying no Bill of Rights. No Bill of Rights was also a humongous argument. I can go into depth on that too. But yeah. Anyway, let's see. So the idea that it would lead to tyranny, that there were too many people, too many people to be represented, because the United States Constitution, we don't follow that when it comes to the House of Representatives anymore. I know people who have been here a lot have heard me say this, but the Constitution originally called for 30,000, one representative in the House of Representatives for every 30,000 citizens. Which means today, if we followed that rule, there'd be like 11.5 thousand people in the House of Representatives. And that's just too many people to get anything done. And that was the argument being made at the time. Furthermore, you look at, just in the Brutus number 3 that we just covered, Brutus was arguing that at the time, the first United States House of Representatives was supposed to have 65 people in it. But Brutus said, well, you're replacing 13 different Congresses that have a total of about 2,000 people in it. So you're cutting what they already had in representatives from 2,000 down to 65. And as the population grows, it's only going to get worse in his estimation. And, there's a lot of truth to what happened. Because now, I don't know the exact number, but 400 people, 350 people out of 350 million, that's what? One person per million? I'm doing that math off the top of my head. It's probably wrong. I'm not a mathematician. So like Matt said, no Bill of Rights was a huge criticism, to which the Federalists said, but the states have Bills of Rights. To which the Anti-Federalists said, yeah, but all the state officials are taking oaths of office to the federal government. Hi, TJ. Thanks for coming. Thanks for being here. We're just chit-chatting. Let me know if you have any questions. Looking into Lincoln arresting Congress and shutting down the newspapers. Civil War. We ended about 1826 on this channel. Let's see. What will we do without the rules? Government at this point is bad. Well, yeah, again, Tyler, I don't like to talk about modern politics because modern politics are very divisive, and, American history is important for everyone to know, no matter what your current belief system is. So I do try and avoid it as best I can. That you have a very Henry David Thoreau libertarian attitude in your comment. I'm not gonna engage. Anyway, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm not agreeing with you. I am being mysterious. Anyway, what we were talking about? Anti-federalism is super fun to learn about. Because again, like what I'm saying about the Constitution, these are not my words. And it's not just like I read it in Brutus. Like the same themes are repeated throughout most of the Anti-Federalist papers at the time. And a lot of it is important to know so we can protect ourselves now. Inferno Machine, yeah, you get it. You get it. Anyway, yeah. If you guys have any more questions, we covered some banking. We covered briefly the Supreme Court. We covered some of the Anti-Federalists. Yes, we're doing good. As I said, we're about 45 minutes now. Are going to try and keep it to an hour. Although, if there's any video in the week that, as we've said before, will run long, this is the video to run long. I'm happy to answer any questions you have that I can. If you're working on any projects, if you have any American founders you'd like to learn more about, I know we glossed over Roger Sherman real quick. Talk about Supreme Court. We talk about Bushrod Washington. FYI, George Washington was not the only high-ranking member of the Washington family to participate in the early federal government. His nephew, Bushrod, and yeah, his name is Bushrod Washington. He ended up becoming an associate justice on the United States Supreme Court. Served with John Marshall for over 30 years. I think Bushrod was over 30 years with John Marshall. So it wasn't just John Marshall dominating the Supreme Court for, from Thomas Jefferson to Alexander Jackson. Andrew Jackson. It wasn't just John Marshall dominating the Supreme Court from Thomas Jefferson to Andrew Jackson. He essentially had a teammate in Bushrod Washington who went along with him and guided everything. Let's see. I'm going to take a quick sip of water. Looking into Henry David. My bad. I keep forgetting. I guess I don't know the real. I will keep watching to get educated. Great. How about that guy, Henry D? Oh, Henry David Thoreau. I spelled. Tell you what, let me pull this up. Henry David Thoreau. Yes, I nailed it. Okay, it's Thoreau. Now, I will say, Henry David Thoreau is a little after the time period we discussed. He's in the 1840s, 1848. He's a super interesting character. And a lot of people who favor super extraordinarily small government do look to Henry David Thoreau, who, again, took some of his economic politics from Roger Sherman. Literally a century later. Although I will admit my favorite Henry David Thoreau quote is, "I went to the woods to live deliberately." I have a sign that says that because I am an evacuee from the greater New York City region to the woods. Because Henry David Thoreau actually was more of a naturalist than a politician. He never ran for office, but he is one of the founders of civil disobedience. He would not pay a tax. He would not pay taxes to the government. Excuse me 1 second. I apologize. Okay, we're back. Sorry about that. When I went to turn off the baby monitor before, it stayed on. So I didn't know if you guys could or could not hear my child just being a baby. But like, he's not a baby anymore. He's just being a baby. Anyhoozle, Henry David Thoreau, he is more famous for civil disobedience. That would be used a lot more 100 years after him in the civil rights movement. He refused to pay taxes during the Mexican-American War because he thought that war was unjust and they were just fighting Mexico for land, which was essentially true. And either way, that was during, but that, we're talking about James K. Polk here. I don't talk a lot about that. I have written about his grandfather, Ezekiel Polk, who was one of the early settlers in Tennessee, and he became an important mentor, not a mentor, but family friend of the Andrew Jackson's family. But yeah, Henry David Thoreau, definitely check him out. Although I will say, like, Henry David Thoreau, all his work starts off really good and then just gets really, like, wordy. Like, even Walden, probably his most famous book is Walden, where he went to the woods to live deliberately. He literally went to his buddy's property, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and lived by a lake in the woods. But that was back in the 1840s when you could do that. And most of that book is him, like, taking notes about, like, what he did that day. And again, he's living by himself in the woods, so there's not a lot he's doing. Either way, let's see. Stepson aide de camp. Oh, George Washington. Yeah, John Parke Custis was very briefly. I think that's what you're talking about. George Washington's aide de camp, though he passed away from yellow fever just after Yorktown. One of many terrible Christmases George Washington had. Lived by Lake Erie. Oh, sweet. Yeah, Tyler. I'm outside Syracuse, so I'm right there with you. Love New York here. Beautiful. I don't. Yeah, I like it. True for sure. I remember reading that book. Yeah, it probably got forced on you actually a while back. Maybe not. Maybe you just went for it. Actually, I don't know if they like make kids read it in school or not. I hate saying make kids read it. I'm not sure if they recommend children educate themselves with that particular book or not. Like I said, it's a little wordy, and if you're going to have kids struggle through old-timey books, that's tough. Probably have them read the Communist Manifesto, which, by the way, came out the same year. Just for some perspective. Whatever. Let's see. And, like, don't take me saying read the Communist Manifesto as, like, me being a communist. I just... You want to be, you got to know, you want to read everything. It's like we talk about Anti-Federalist Papers here. I could get a lot of criticism from a lot of people for just talking about the Anti-Federalist Papers, but it's important to know. Just like, communism. It took long, I can remember as long descriptions of water. Right, Ashley? It's like, come on, dude. Like, we know. We get it. You've been sitting next to a lake for a year by yourself in a hastily built shanty cabin. Get a job, man. It's a book. All books with... Right, yeah, exactly. I was reading about John Adams' second trip to France. Took John Quincy, Charles Francis Dana, and John Thaxter. I couldn't find much on Thaxter. Do you know him? Okay, yeah, no, that's like the one name in that sentence I'm not really familiar with. No, but I will, you know what? I will write down John Thaxter, because that sounds like someone very interesting. Yeah, I know all about Francis Dana. So what Matt is referencing here, and I'm going to write Thaxter down because I want to remember it. I don't know a lot about John Thaxter. I do know that... Did this come up while you were reading about Waterhouse? Because I know you've been reading about Waterhouse. John Adams brought his two kids, John Quincy Adams and Charles Francis Adams, to France the second time he went. Quincy might have gone the first time too, I believe. So they both get an education over there, and Charles Adams very quickly doesn't like it. He's there less than a year, and then he gets sent back home. He would go to Harvard and be pretty smart, but then he'd take to alcohol. And if you want to read the saddest article I've ever written, read the Charles Adams article called Death of a President's Son. He passed away just at the end of his father's presidency. It's super, super sad. John Quincy, of course, would end up... we know him as a president of the United States, but John Quincy, he would come back. He would work in the George Washington administration. He'd go back and be a diplomat in Europe for George Washington during the Revolution. He would work in this. He would be a senator during Thomas Jefferson's administration. He would be like an unofficial representative of his father's administration. And then he would end up, by the time James Monroe was president, end up being Secretary of State, essentially writing the Monroe Doctrine, dealing with Andrew Jackson. I'm sorry, I'm not talking loud enough. Dealing with Andrew Jackson as Andrew Jackson invaded the Seminole Native Americans in Florida, and then becoming president. So, like, in a weird way, John Quincy Adams is a founder, is an American founder, though kind of not, because he's kind of part of the Jacksonian age. He's literally the child of a founder. So, like, and yeah, Francis Dana. So Francis Dana, for secretary. He took Dana and Thaxter for secretaries. All right, that's not exactly my understanding. So Francis Dana was an American revolutionary, and Francis Dana goes over... He is sent by the Continental Congress under the Articles of Confederation as the first minister to Russia. And on his way over, he runs into the Adams family in Netherlands, I believe. And that's where, I think what you meant to say is Dana took John Quincy Adams under his wing as secretary. So 14-year-old John Quincy Adams was number 2 to minister to Russia. So this is where he starts at 14 years old, getting the experience that would later have him be a European diplomat for George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, although he came back for Jefferson, but then would be Secretary of State. This is how he got the knowledge and wherewithal to be Secretary of State. So it's super interesting. So Dana and John Quincy Adams go to Russia, and they meet with Catherine the Great. Because that's what's happening right now. Catherine the Great is running Russia. And by the way, Frederick the Great is running Prussia at this time. So again, just to put some context into what's happening in the world, these people you heard about in grade school were all alive at this time. So Francis Dana goes and meets with Catherine the Great. Now, she would not officially recognize him as a diplomat because Russia was still not very powerful at the time, and although Catherine the Great was changing that, and they didn't want to get into a war with England, as France did, and the Netherlands did, and Spain did, and everyone else was doing. They wanted to stay out of it. Actually, Catherine the Great starts something called the League of Armed Neutrality. And the League of Armed Neutrality was a military alliance between Russia and about a half dozen other countries. I believe Finland and Norway were involved. Some of the smaller states on the northern Atlantic, and the Baltic Sea, they all joined the League of Armed Neutrality. And the League of Armed Neutrality said, we are not joining these wars, but if you attack one of us, you attack all of us, and we will all attack the one nation that joins us. We're not going to fight all of your wars. We're only going to attack one nation that attacks any of these nations. And Francis Dana was there for all that. Again, one of the reasons she would not officially recognize him or John Quincy Adams is because didn't want to get into a war that America was technically still in. I have can't see you. A long list of books to read because of the channel I'm playing. Yeah, no, I know. I have a long list of books to read too. They keep piling up. And my problem, as you've learned, I'm sure, is that I spend so much time reading through like primary sources that I don't have time to read fun books other people have written. Dana was on Licensible with Adams. Licensible. Is that the name of a ship? Maybe? Did he travel? Oh, did they travel with Francis Dana to meet their father in Europe? Matt, is that okay? That makes sense. They would have been called, as we've learned this week, a supercargo. Which again, supercargo is cargo that's a person, an important person, being transported from one place to another. Sounds like a great idea for armed neutrality. Well, it's weird. It was essentially mutually assured destruction 200 years earlier. Infernal Machine. I've been reading Debate on the Constitution. I'm still in part 1. Very interesting. Let us know who wrote that. I'd love to know. It's a pretty vague title. So I'm not entirely sure what you're referencing there, but I'd love to read it, learn more. I am a student of the American Revolution myself. So I also am always trying to learn. That's actually the articles I write 5 days a week are generally articles. They're almost all of it is something new I just learned. Like I try and find something I've never heard of before and write about it. It's not always true. I take an easy day off every once in a while and write a story I have in my memory, but for the most part. The ship that crashed in Spain. Oof. Licensible. I'm gonna write that down. Not aware of that ship. Matt coming in with the hot ideas for articles today. Sensible. Right? It's French? Sensible. Sorry, French people. I'm not trying to insult you. That's a South Park joke, actually. Cool. We're about to hit an hour now. Generally, what we're trying to keep the videos to. Make sure you like and subscribe. Mrs. Green, welcome. I think you wrote about this on a comment to me, and it took me a little too long to get back to you. I'm still not great at like being an internet personality. I need to get back quicker. Ms. Green, yes, Nathaniel Green is amazing. He is arguably the reason that the American Revolutionary War was won. The war in the North was essentially over, and the war in the South was tenuous. And when Nathaniel Green took over, not only as the head general in the Southern Department, but as a leader, as a quartermaster general, also in charge of feeding and clothing the troops. He was not invaluable, like literally the guy. He did it. He went down south and he won the war. And then it was when he and others, of course, Lafayette and such, trapped Cornwallis at Yorktown. That's when Washington came down. Washington wanted to win the war in the North. He wanted to take over New York City, or take back New York City. And he was like, okay, I got to go follow Green because Green's been doing it. Don't get me wrong. Like, he was the one who put Green there. He loved Green being there. But yeah, do it. It's hard to understand Nathaniel Green. And Nathaniel Green went bankrupt. So I have an article. Let's see if I can find it. I'll pull it up because it'll probably explain it a little bit better than I can just from my memory. But Nathaniel Green found himself in a bit of a prickly situation during the occupation of something. The financial ruin of an American legend is the name of this article that I wrote a while ago, last year maybe. Oh man, a year and a half ago. Woof, time flies. He was in the Southern Department, and okay, it was a year after the victory at Yorktown. The Continental Army was still in the South, and many of the soldiers were stationed in Charleston, South Carolina, because it took 2 years for boats to travel back and forth across the ocean to finally actually get the peace treaty. The war was theoretically over, but we needed a treaty of peace. So there were still skirmishes around, and the army had to be maintained. In fact, John Lawrence has become famous, and this is when he was killed, during a random skirmish a year after the war was over. So the army is in Charleston, hanging out, and supplies are low, and morale is super low, because they're just hanging out, and they don't have a lot to eat or a lot of clothing to wear, and Nathaniel Green was in charge of this area, and something had to be done. So Green was authorized by Robert Morris, who we talked about earlier. Robert Morris, was financing the revolution. He had been authorized by Robert Morris to issue bills of credit on Robert Morris's behalf, not even the Continental Army's behalf, Robert Morris's behalf. And it meant that he could take out loans, which Green assumed meant he would be reimbursed for by the Continental Congress. But unfortunately, the Continentals and their bills of credit were decreasing in value all the time. And there was a gentleman whose name was conveniently John Banks. John Banks, although no one else would give the army credit, John Banks says, I'm a patriot, I will agree to give you credit, but I don't know if I'm getting paid back. So he gave them loans at the high rate of 11%, which is a lot, especially with the gigantic loans they were taking out. Again, Banks was taking a very big risk giving out these loans, and that's why he was justified in making the rate so high. And this is a time where a lot of people were making a lot of money off the war. You look at the Wadsworth family in Connecticut, for example. A lot of money. This money, with these interest rates, essentially saved the Southern Department, because Green was able to clothe and feed the soldiers. But then a little bit of an issue happened, because John Banks dies. And it goes to he has some partners and an estate. His estate is given to other people who now want to collect this money. But there was a little bit of confusion. How did I phrase it? I'm going to read what I wrote because it's hard to phrase. The bills had never been paid to Banks' company. Perhaps Banks had the money on his person. Oh, okay. Nathaniel Green signed his own name, making him responsible. He did this assuming Robert Morris would honor the loans and pay it back. But when Green contacted Morris about the debts, and a year later, John Banks passed away. Somehow the bills were never paid. Perhaps, again, I'm not sure if it was Morris thought that Green was being shady, or if he thought Green should have signed the Continental Congress's name or anything like that. But perhaps the money had been on his person but not labeled for the company. Perhaps Morris had never paid the Banks at all. At the time, the Continental Congress was as good as broke, and there were false rumors being spread that Green was using public funds to start a private business with Banks. And that was part of the problem. People thought that his shady dealings with this guy Banks was Green trying to make a profit, as many people were doing. The truth is, Green was not. He was trying to raise money to feed the soldiers, which Banks, had he not died, could have verified. Now, this money never gets reimbursed. And this really sucks for Green, because Green ends up going home to Rhode Island broke. Because he was apparently, because he signed his own name, responsible for all these debts. and then he has to sell his house. Fortunately for him, because of his service, somewhere in the South, I think it was South Carolina. Yeah, South Carolina, to thank him for his service, granted him a huge grant of land, and he actually ends up moving his family down south. But in his early 40s, Green ends up dying of sunstroke out in the hot South Carolina sun, which was not great. And fortunately, Alexander Hamilton works with the Continental Congress, or no, years later, the actual U.S. Congress, to get a petition passed to give Green's widow some money to reimburse for much of this money. So, there's a lot we know about Nathaniel Green, but maybe you didn't know that. Is kind of a sad ending to an American hero. Again, when I made my list, I make an annual list of most important founders, and he's top 15, easy. I read that his wife actually invented the cotton gin. Oh, I didn't even get into that. She was seeing Eli Whitney at the time. Yes, Matt, interesting. Yeah, so the cotton... It seems like the cotton gin was invented at his wife's plantation. Now, who invented it? I don't know. Probably a little bit Eli Whitney. Probably for the most part Eli Whitney. Though it is totally possible they were in the same house that a man would take credit from a woman's product. Although at the time, again, things were changing a little bit. Women were finally publishing books under their own name and such. French support Comte Rochambeau and Isaac Rochambeau. Excuse me. Take a sip of water here. We spoke a little bit about Rochambeau earlier. They landed in Rhode Island and stopped in Connecticut at Asia Barnes Tavern for a little bit before coming south and helping win the war. I definitely, I don't know as much about the Rochambeaus as I should. I know about their time in America, but I haven't done a lot of research to their lives overseas. There are many other French founders that I have done research on, so I am going to, you know what, I'll put this aside. I will do some research on them this week, and if you want to come back next week, we can talk about a little more next week, if that's okay. And the reason is I like to have people... Did I write about Rochambeau? I don't think I did. Man, I've written so many articles. Chambeau and Roberdeau. No, I don't think I've written about either of them. I'm gonna be embarrassed if I have. No, yeah, just Asia Barnes Tavern. Yeah, a lot of new names today. You're right, Matt. Thank you guys for coming. So this is just a live chat that I have. For those of you who are new here, I put out videos 5 days a week. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday are about quick short videos about random founders. Wednesday, I write 5 articles a week on my website, Founder of the Day. And Wednesday, we do an hour-long weekly wrap-up. And on Friday, we play trivia, and it's a lot of fun. All of those videos are 8:15 Eastern Standard Time. This is the only one that's kind of out of the way. Couldn't find the publisher. Inferno. So when you said debates on the Constitution, you're actually reading the debates from the Constitutional Convention. The only thing we have there are... I'm trying to think this out, because the only thing we actually have really are... Oh, no, you're reading about the debates after the Constitution. I see what you're saying. With, Patterson... Is that his name? No, Luther Martin. And probably Melancton Smith. I'm super interested. Yeah, no problem, Ginger. Thank you for coming. Thank you for... Yeah, I will do that. So hit like and subscribe for sure. They are new to us, Matt. Just going down memory lane. Yeah, I will say... Matt, Misfit, you guys have been here quite a while. Good to see you too, TJ. TJ, I will say, TJ and Matt are the reason I do things at 8:15, because they hopped on board super early. Back when my videos were still absolute garbage. Not that they're perfect now, but again, this is a free-form, the first 15 minutes of this was probably boring for anyone who watched back, because I was kind of chatting with Matt for a minute there. But yeah, this... Sundays, if you guys are studying anything or you run into anyone you want to learn more about, bring it here. Even if I can't answer it right away, there's a lot of people with a lot of knowledge coming in the comments who can help. And I'm going to look up Roberdeau. I don't think I've done him either. I'm thinking of a name from someone from Pennsylvania. Daniel Roberdeau. I'm assuming that's not Isaac Roberdeau, but Daniel Roberdeau, he was a soldier in the Pennsylvania militia. Again, I think this is not who you're asking me about, but he was in the Pennsylvania militia, an early radical. He didn't sign anything. May 1776, he was chosen as a moderator for a meeting of Philadelphia radicals. A stage was hastily set up on the lawn of the State House on a rainy day, and Roberdeau and others, including Thomas McKeon, John Cadwallader, and Timothy Matlack, called for Pennsylvania to remove the limitations of its Continental Congress delegates, which they stated could not vote for independence. So he was one of the leaders who literally built a stage and stood in the middle of the city of Philadelphia and said, hey, let's make the representatives, let's change our instructions. Let's say that our delegates can vote for independence. And a month and a half later, they did. He was also known for, he made an important lead mine fort. He did sign the Articles of Confederation. All right. And he led certain battles. That's Daniel Roberdeau. Just define radicals. Well, in the early 1770s, radicals would have been those calling for independence. That's a good question. That's a very good question. They were all patriots for the most part. But I mean, look, the First Continental Congress, there are people who signed the Articles of Association, also known as the Continental Association, which, by the way, is up there with the Declaration, Articles of Confederation, and Constitution as the four major documents. It's the Continental Association. It's the result of the First Continental Congress. And there are people who signed that, which led to the boycott against British goods, who ended up being loyalists. At that point, no one was really calling for independence. Sam Adams was the most radical, probably, arguably. Him and from South Carolina, don't tread on me. Gadsden, Christopher Gadsden from South Carolina, also would have been a radical. 2 years later, the radicals were the ones saying calling for independence. It's time to throw off the government. That was a really radical thing. It's literally a revolution, pretty radical. And there were people who were not on board with that. I mean, even notably, John Dickinson is probably the most famous because John Dickinson thought that they should write a new government to replace the old government with first, or else bad things can happen. And even though after he absented himself from the vote on independence, and then he was replaced later that summer by people who favored independence from Pennsylvania, he still is the primary author of the Articles of Confederation and would be a governor of Delaware and Pennsylvania and attend the Constitutional Convention, but not a radical. John Hancock's reason for signing his name so large. So there's a few things that, yes, he definitely signed his name large, but I will warn you, and I don't want to break your heart with the truth, as I see we do to people on this channel. He did want to make sure, he did sign it nice and big so the king could see it, but also that gets blown up a little bit because when the original Constitution was, Declaration of Independence was printed up as the Dunlap broadsides and sent to the States and sent to George Washington and sent to Europe, John Hancock was the president of Congress. And the only job the president of Congress in the Continental Congress ever really had that made it special is he would sign official documents. And then the secretary, Charles Thompson, would attest to documents. So the initial broadsides only had 2 signatures on them. John Hancock, nice and big in the middle, and then Charles Thompson on the side to attest. But because his was the only name people saw on the original constitutions, it made it larger than life, so to speak. Though, again, when they ended up all signing it in August of 1776, he did sign first, he did sign largest, and he did apparently say, so the king can see it with his stupid face. Don't Tread on Me, I thought that was Metallica. No, yeah, nice, well played. Don't Tread on Me is the flag, you see, the Don't Tread on Me flag. That's called the Gadsden flag. It was named after a gentleman, Christopher Gadsden from South Carolina, who's often called the Paul Revere of South Carolina. He actually went all the way to New York City for the Stamp Act Congress 10 years before the Revolution. So he was an early radical. You want to talk about radical? Like, he was the one at the First Continental Congress saying, like, independence, guys? Independence? And everyone else was like, no, shut up, man. Shh. You get us hung. How quickly things changed in 2 years. The 3%. Tyler, 3%. Yeah, so the 3% is essentially the amount, because I think you're referencing those, like, the stickers people put on their cars and such. The 3% is essentially the amount of people who served in the continent between militias and continental armies. Essentially, the amount of people that served under George Washington in the actual war. Excuse me. The numbers are tough. We don't have exact counts of everything. It seems that George Washington's army never really exceeded 30,000 people at any one time. But if you, with people enlisting and then leaving after their enlistments ended, there's, overlap, but really Washington's army was usually about 20,000 people. Again, spread out across the continent, different leaders, different militias, yada yada yada. As I want to say on this channel very frequently, it wasn't just one army fighting the American Revolution. It was the Continental Army, sure, but then there were 13 states that all had their own militias, which essentially could be looked at as other armies. Rhode Island actually had a little army of its own. You also have Vermont with the Green Mountain Boys, which is just a militia, but much like Kentucky also kind of had its own army. So now we're talking about 15 separate armies all working together, and that goes for the Navy too. There was the Continental Navy. South Carolina, you guys down there with Alexander Gillian, had arguably the biggest private navy, not private navy, but state navy, although Massachusetts had a state navy. Many states had their own navies. So, yeah, that's it's pretty great. And I say this because, the numbers, if it does get up to 30,000 people at any one time, that's the 3% of the 2.5 million people living in British North America, the rebellious colonies at the time. So that's where the 3% comes from. Now, the truth of the matter is, when it comes to the public at large, about a third of the people seem to have supported the Patriots. About a third of the people were loyalists, and about a third of the people, who I call the forgotten third, just didn't care. Leave me out of it. Let me know who wins. I'll be here when you're done. And before because we have a natural tendency now to be like, ugh, why did they stay out of it? Blah, blah, blah. Well, people needed to eat. Business needed to carry on. You can't just shut down a whole country to fight a war. And these people just continued about their day. Truthfully, several of the people who were involved in creating the United States Constitution, and even more than that, who were involved in helping Alexander Hamilton establish the Treasury Department, I'm speaking directly about wealthy Philadelphians. Their loyalties were questionable throughout the war. And after the war, when people stopped caring to question, they stepped back into the spotlight with their dollars, their very many dollars. Notably, the Shippen family. They have become more notable recently because Peggy Shippen was the wife of Benedict Arnold, and that was on the TV show Turn, which is a fun show that takes many liberties, as I've discussed. But the Shippen family was super wealthy. And then not Tillman, Tench Coates, which might be pronounced Cox. I always get it wrong. And I'm actually waiting on a book I ordered, which is pretty expensive and hard to find, about Tench Cox, who his loyalties were questioned during the war, and after the war he became real tight with his friend Alexander Hamilton. On the eve of the Constitutional Convention, literally its Constitutional Convention, known at the time as the Philadelphia Convention, was going to start on Monday, the Friday before. Tench Coates gives a speech about industrialization and how this new constitution and how the government needs to direct itself in a fashion that can stimulate industry in the obviously approaching Industrial Revolution, to the point where he actually talks about steam and steam power. So again, very interesting. Now I've gone a little for yeah, I've gotten a little far off. And navies. Yes, Matt, and navies. I got the navies in there. So are you going to say, no one forges. At the time, people would have their secretaries write letters for them, but they would generally sign them themselves. And a document of this nature, it would be signed. Again, the prestige of being president of the Continental Congress, the only thing that gave you was that you got to gavel the hammer at the beginning and the end of the day, and that you got to sign official documents. So he would certainly, especially John Hancock, who was notably a little bit anxious about who was going to be president, would certainly be using all the little bits of power he was given. Not to hate on John Hancock, that was just his personality. Many people from Massachusetts were a little testy at the time. Sorry, Matt, I believe you're from that area, but not anymore. Now you guys are just smoking weed and it's no big deal. Stop ragging on Turn or we're going to be fighting. Oh, Misfit, you should know, you know my opinion. Here it is. It's not even on my shelf. I still have it next to me. Alexander Rose, Washington Spies. If you want to learn about espionage in the American Revolution, this is the book. He's also the same person who wrote the screenplay for Turn. So the gentleman who did this very well, perfectly researched, excellent history book also was asked by the network to turn it into 4 seasons of television, and he got a little carried away. I understand that he did. And you know, Misfit, I'm very angry about Austin Rowe, which I'm not even going to get into Austin Rowe now, despite the fact that he was extraordinarily important to the American Revolution. And Turn, in the show Turn, they make his name a pseudonym for a bad guy. Come on. Anyhoozle. What are you going to say? Shut down the whole world to fight a virus. They did kind of shut down the Capitol at time, and they did shut down the Capitol of Philadelphia during the pandemic of or the whatever yellow fever. I think it was yellow fever in Philadelphia in 1783. Where there was a debate about whether or not George Washington should re-enter the city. Eventually he does to like cool things down, but it's a while. He lets it cool down first. New York seems to have kept the severity of a yellow fever outbreak in 1795. They kept that a little hush-hush, and then a lot more people got sick from it. And at the end of the 1790s, and I believe I'll be writing about this week, so spoiler alert, you know, the first smallpox vaccine is established over in Europe, and it's brought back to the United States for the first time at the end of the 1790s. I have an interview if you want to go through my stuff. I haven't done an interview in like 4 months. I'm starting them in January. I'm hoping to go indefinitely because I've made contact with a lot of really interesting people in the industry. So blah blah blah. But if you look back at my interview with Stephen Cox, he talks about his book, The Fever of 1721. I hope I got that right. Sorry, Stephen. But a fever, an outbreak of smallpox in Boston in the early 1720s, and we actually talk about its relation to a young Benjamin Franklin who was living there at the time. But that is when the first inoculations were started, and then here we are 70 years later, just after Franklin dies, where a vaccine is actually created. So it's super interesting. I read somewhere Washington had a French friend, not Lafayette, that we forget all about. Okay, see you, Ashley. Thanks for coming. See you tomorrow. Or Wednesday, I guess. Washington had a lot of French friends. Once they came over, once the Continental Congress stopped giving them all commissions and only giving the ones who deserved them commissions, they became friends. And he said, oui, oui. I'm not entirely sure which one you're referencing, but there were several Frenchmen who worked in the Continental Army. He would have associated, now Washington himself never went to France, but he certainly would have associated with many Frenchmen, especially after the Revolution, because Washington did have an export business, I'll remind you this whole time, and he sent it, so one of the major complaints at the beginning of the Revolutionary War was that Britain was not letting the colonists trade with France anymore, and that was not acceptable. Technically, they hadn't been able to trade with anyone but Great Britain for over 150 years, but, no, not over 150 years, over 100 years, probably 130 years, but only now did Great Britain start enforcing that rule, and that was not acceptable. So I'll tell you what, guys, it's 1:40. This keeping it to an hour hasn't worked. We're approaching an hour and a half. I've been talking a lot. I'm really, really grateful that you guys showed up, especially all you new guys, and especially also all you old guys. Thank you for joining the team. Like I said, make sure you subscribe for the new videos. Hit like. This is a Rev War all the time household. So thank you for joining me. I am going to go for now. There's a link to our Discord channel on the bottom. Please feel free to join up. I have made some changes, so some of you might have to put in an email address now. That is for not just my security, but your security as well. I do apologize for anyone who has adversely affected, but it's a lot of fun. Matt just put in a fantastic meme in there. I saw it just before I went on air. The last thing I did was see the Thomas Jefferson meme. So thank you, Matt. Thank you guys all for participating. I am going to go now. Haven't come up with a sign off for this particular one. Misfit shared some memes. Oh, I am seeing now that you say that, I have a little button on my Discord saying to look, and I'll do that as soon as I sign off. So thank you guys. Let me know in the Discord what you think, or in the comments what you think my sign off should be for study hall here. And